When I finally played and reviewed 20XX, it was 5 years after it had been released. Taking inspiration from the Mega Man X series, 20XX felt exactly like a fan of that series would expect, and even though the game was fun, I felt like I saw most everything to be seen after about 10 hours. But after completing 20XX, I learned that Batterystaple Games was working on the follow-up title, 30XX, and now that it's out of early access, I was excited to jump in and see how they improved and built on lessons learned in their first release. 30XX is a roguelike action platforming game that is heavily inspired by the Mega Man X series. In 30XX, you play as Ace or Nina and set out to defeat 8 bosses, collecting upgrades and weapon abilities along the way. Because the game is structured around a roguelike format, you have one shot to defeat every boss, with death sending you back to base to start over again. There are also the typical hallmarks of roguelike games, with a persistent resource for permanent upgrades and random upgrades called Augs that can be collected during a run. The game opens with Ace finding and reactivating Nina, and introduces narrative elements such as the main villain, Eleanor, who is the architect of the gauntlet you must clear. Something new to 30XX is multiple game modes, with standard mode being the advertised roguelike experience, and mega and community modes, but more on that later. Gameplay is very similar to 20XX, with the main goal of each stage being move to the right to reach the boss. As an action platformer, the movement is very responsive and fluid with all of the expected Mega Man X flavor, such as dashing, mid-air movement, and wall jumping. Nina and Ace, which can be thought of as versions of X and Zero, each have their own mechanics and playstyle. Both characters have health and energy, a resource used for abilities gathered by defeating bosses, and a number of cores that can be allocated for equipping weapon and armor upgrades. Nina is a ranged attacker with her N-Buster and regains energy when hitting enemies. Nina can also fuse boss powers together for additional effects, but can only have 3 active boss powers available. Ace is a melee attacker with various weapons that can be equipped, and can increase his energy regeneration by landing normal attacks to build style, represented by a colored flame. Ace cannot fuse boss abilities, but is able to have 9 powers equipped, and is able to equip different weapons at no core cost for additional flexibility. There are a number of UX improvements to the game that elevate the overall experience. Unlike in 20XX, there are no shared stages, and all 8 bosses have their own stages to traverse, with certain enemy types being unique to each stage. Every stage also has a mini-boss that must be fought at the midpoint and rewards the player with an Aug and Memoria, the persistent resource spent on permanent upgrades. Pickups have also been more streamlined, with energy pickups being removed and health pickups restoring both health and energy. There are also pickups such as nuts, armor, and tokens making a return appearance. Some stages will have optional trials that reward the player with an Aug, but rather than being pass-fail like in the previous game, there is a tiered medal system based on how much damage you do or do not take. I think this is a very positive change because the player is still rewarded for attempting the challenge, it just may not be the best possible reward. The new game modes added in 30XX are Mega Mode and Community Mode. Mega Mode turns 30XX into a more traditional Mega Man experience. You begin by selecting a save file and are put into a hub where you can choose what order to tackle the stages in, while also keeping your upgrades on death and being able to try the stage again without losing progress. This is a really smart addition in my opinion, as it helps capture traditional Mega Man fans and players that may not be fans of the roguelike genre. Community Mode makes use of the included level editor, called 30XX Maker, and allows players to craft and upload their own levels for sharing with the 30XX community. Each community level uses one of the 8 stages as a base, and must include a boss arena to complete the stage. These are big additions that help make 30XX more of a platform, and open up possibilities for players to find their preferred experience. While playing 30XX, there are clear lessons learned from 20XX that were used to create a much more polished experience, such as the overhauled pixel graphics being much easier to parse at a glance, but there are still some pain points that I think are worth mentioning. For one, the stages do have procedural elements to them, although the structure of each stage is fairly consistent. Each stage has a specific obstacle before and after the mini-boss, such as Hoot Omega's stage always having a slow-falling vertical segment in the second half of the level. However, things like the placement of details within those sections, enemies, platforms, etc., are more procedural. In later levels, more enemies spawn and become more powerful variants that fire more projectiles. Coupled with random placement, this increase in enemies and projectiles can result in instances where it's difficult to parse what's happening on the screen. This is the most apparent in the last levels of the game, where enemies and hazards from all stages are used. It doesn't make the last stages impossible, but there are some combinations of enemies and hazards that are very difficult to navigate without taking large amounts of damage. An issue I noticed that was also prevalent in 20XX is that the game doesn't always do a good job of communicating what an item or weapon does. While this technically becomes a non-issue because picking up an item tells you the explicit effects, the descriptions of items often don't inform the player of the severity of effects. This is also a problem with some of Ace's weapons, as there typically isn't an explanation of the weapon and power associated with it. A great example of this is Ace's Dawnbind weapon. It's a whip with the description, "The light finds a way," but there's nothing telling you that the weapon's special move is a bola that prevents normal enemies from shooting projectiles. And I was 16 hours into 30XX before I realized that you can aim the whip up and down, which makes it much more useful. There are some other game feel issues that did require adjusting to, such as some projectiles blending into brighter backgrounds, enemies continuing attacks even if they move off screen, and some platforms being just out of jump range despite appearing close enough to land on. However, many of these points were easily remedied by slowing down a bit and being more careful in instances where I realized I was prioritizing speed. There are also some carryovers of some of the best ideas in 20XX, such as the daily and weekly challenges, co-op mode, and a boss rush that allows players to apply their mastery of boss knowledge. There's also a challenge consisting of only community-created stages that I admittedly have not engaged with, but it's another smart addition that can further incentivize players to use the 30XX Maker mode. While the gameplay is exactly what you may expect, it's still executed well and is a blast to play as a longtime Mega Man fan. The roguelike mechanics can be off-putting, but the inclusion of Mega Mode for a more traditional experience was a really smart move by Batterystaple Games. Overall, I'm really enjoying 30XX, and thanks to additional post-game difficulties and challenges that hint toward a more expanded ending, I can definitely see myself playing this game well into the future. Thanks for watching, take care, and remember, keep having fun.